All right, welcome everyone. So my name's Jonathan McAleese, we're here on behalf of Chapter 21. We've got a very exciting presentation for those of you in the room, those of you joining from around the country, the East Coast, West Coast, North, South, etc. A little bit of interesting news just before we get into the presentation. The RV12 project that you'd all be so familiar with had its first flight today. Did a couple of circuits. Apparently they're all very uneventful circuits, which is always a great circuit. The kit was ordered in November 2019. It arrived in 2020. It was built by a school project. There was many hours put into it by the students who were building the thing. One of the students is sitting over here, which is Alex. I'd like to pass out the thanks to all the TCs, the mentors, anyone who hitched a trailer on and dragged it across the country or... Hold it. Apparently we have some audio improvements to make. But yeah, look, we'd like to really thank anyone who's involved in that RV12 project, and in particular the sponsors. Conveniently, one of those sponsors was actually Swish Projects. Now we've got James from Swish Projects, who's here, I'm sure everyone's read James's bio, and I couldn't do it justice, so I'm sure people have seen the bio. It's very impressive. James is a very well-distinguished air traffic controller based in Melbourne, and he's going to give us all the insight as to the do's and the don'ts around airspace. So I might hand over to James.
Good on you. Thanks, mate.
Welcome, James.
Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you very much. Hello, viewers, and everybody else in the club tonight. Where can I stand? I'm blocking the screen. I'll have to probably get back over this side. Am I right to use this now, Alex? Good on you, mate. We'll kick that off. Yeah, I'm a controller, tower controller mostly these days. I worked as an approach controller as well, and of course my little plane, and I also import aeroplanes and that sort of thing. So I suppose you could say planes are my thing. But tonight we're going to be talking about, is it going to skip forward for me? Yep, there we go, air traffic control. So I've got a little phone off icon up there if you could give your phone some attention. So the goal of this brief, we could really turn this into a 12-part mini-series. Like this could be 6 weeks long, this brief. So all we're looking to do tonight is to give everybody a bit of understanding of how air traffic controllers do their job, and the sort of thing that we can do to help you out as pilots. It is contextualised to the Australian audience because that's where we are. So for people who'll be looking at this in a future time, it's only good up until November of 2023. After that, all the perishable information has perhaps expired. And the last thing I'd say is that for the purposes of this brief, we're not training air traffic controllers, we're not even training pilots, we're just trying to explain some background information. So where appropriate, I have simplified things a little bit more than perhaps some subject matter experts would like, and we've paraphrased a little bit. I am looking forward to triggering a few people. They're going to roll in hard saying I don't know what I'm talking about, but that's fine, you can do that. Alright, everyone happy with the rules of engagement? If you have any questions, please write them down. They'll be collected and we'll go through them at the end rather than interrupt things as they go. Who's ever thought that? It would really be better for all of us air traffic control. So we actually, as controllers, we have the same goals as the pilot. Like as a controller in the tower, when I see 6 aircraft converging on my zone boundary and I've got 3 more approaching the holding point and no one has yet called for clearance, no one's called ready, I just want someone to call ready so I can say cleared for immediate takeoff. I want you on your way. And it's the same thing when somebody's approaching the control zone boundary. Oh, for the love of God, would someone please call me instead of entering an orbit or whatever, just call, I'll get you in, you're now number 1. So we will want the same thing. Unfortunately, we're a bit limited. Like I can't just give you track direct and have everything you want because there's other people that also want the same thing. So we have to juggle a few priorities around. Typically speaking, the first person to call at the zone boundary, I'll probably assess how that's going to look with other people who I know are about to call. Perhaps they're already identified and coming to me from approach. Perhaps there's someone I've watched screaming towards the boundary at 230 knots for the last 40 seconds. So if you're a bit slower, I might give you a strange instruction to track out for a 4-mile final. It's a bit weird. And the next guy, you're going to track direct to a close left base, and then it all will become apparent when you both turn final at the same time, 2 miles apart. So that's basically how we do it. when things are on the rails, if you like, it's actually not a particularly difficult job. It's quite repetitive and routine if you're doing it right. But then we add a bit of weather, then the police will call up saying they've got a car chase, they need to go over the top of Melbourne Airport along the Western Ring Road with Melbourne at 27 only. And at the same time, of course, we're going to lose a runway or the ILS, and then the weather's looking like changing. And at that point, you'd rather be at home watching TV. But it's a good job. So there's always more going on. I think that would be the first thing to take away. There is way more going on in the controller's wheelhouse than is apparent to any pilot flying around. We're usually, depending upon where you work, maybe less than 50% of your formal communications are even external. Much of it is talking to the other controllers you're working with, much of it is talking to the neighbouring approach or departures controllers. We're talking to Melbourne Tower a lot, trying to balance our runway configurations, and there's always a lot going on. The phone never stops ringing, and that's before we have an in-flight emergency to handle. So probably the takeaway from this slide is we're on the same side. I want you gone just as much as you do, and I want you on the ground just as much as you do, so I can focus on the next guy that's distracting me from my coffee. Okie dokie. Well, what's happened with here? It's sort of, there we go. So we have different ways of doing our job. If you think about an occupational health and safety type of scenario where the best thing you could do to stop a kid getting their hand cut off in a drop saw would be not to have kids near drop saws. So that's sort of what we do as well with our airspace. We have a lot of people that are all competing for the use of our airspace. Whether it's the military or any skydivers, we've got naval indirect fire or artillery gunnery, bombing ranges, who knows what. We've got people flying around their bug smasher, and then we've got the bigger jets here. So we've developed a system, not us in particular, but aviators in general since about the 1900s, where we have certain types of airspace. Where we can, we reserve them specifically for that activity, which is totally incompatible with another type of activity. Any prizes for what we'd call that? No, restricted airspace. So we'll start off with talking about the restricted airspace, because I think, especially where we are down in Victoria, there's quite a bit around the joint between the Puckapunjal Gunnery Range and we've got East Sales airspace. You just can't get to the Gold Coast without flying through someone's restricted airspace. So for the most part, if we can understand restricted airspace, you'll probably find your life has just improved quite a bit. So anyone know who that is? Green Day? You got to keep them separate. I won't use this slide again. Can you write that down?
James, can we just try with this one?
Yeah, is this one not working that well?
It's a bit distorted.
Oh, okay. Let's try that. All right, how's that? I might just hang on to it then, eh?
Yeah.
So we want to come up with a way to let the ARTI guys what the ARTI guys are doing, and we'll have our restricted airspace. And in many cases, for example, Townsville International Airport and Newcastle Airport are exclusively operated by the Royal Australian Air Force. So unless you read URSA, you may not even be aware that you're flying into a military restricted area. It's basically treated the same as Class C controlled airspace, and that's how it should be. In fact, the military and air services in the past did exactly the same air traffic control course, and I think we're going back that way again now. We may even be just working next to each other, which is how it should be, really. It's the same job. At least that's the case in Australia. In other places it's not. So think of restricted airspace as being the same as Class C controlled airspace, and you may maybe get a clearance through there, or you might not. It just depends on the classification. So you probably know what I'm talking about. You'll see that in these restricted areas here, in fact there's a new class of airspace called military. Have you seen that? You'll start to see that from the 1st of December. This chart actually comes into effect tomorrow. So yeah, we have restricted area 360, for example. That's currently called 359 until midnight tonight. So we've got R359, A, B, C, D, E, all around East Sales airspace. When East Sale is actually open, that's basically their own type of controlled airspace, and you can just ask for a clearance and you may or may not get it. I've asked for a clearance in my bug smasher and been cleared straight through. In fact, I think, Kelvin, we got that together. We were with Stratford. Yeah, they vectored us around a little bit, but we just got to clear it straight through this restricted airspace rather than having to chase this danger area, because the conditions weren't that great that day, as I remember. The cloud was a bit low, and I didn't really feel like flying all the way around Wilson's Prom, so we wanted to get through here, and that's what we got. So the type of airspace is where you'll find that. The Office of Airspace Regulation in Australia look after that, and examples include airspace around military installations, high-density flying ops, air shows. Sometimes we'll put them up around bushfires, sometimes we'll put them up around like hostage situations. There'll be like an armed gunman. The last thing they want is the media chopper hanging 300 feet outside his bedroom window. Unless we activate a restricted area, can't stop them, right? If they're operating way up here somewhere outside controlled airspace, I don't have any jurisdiction there. So that's when you might find a temporary restricted area be activated by NOTAM and Central get in touch with them, and now they're no longer allowed in that area. So how do you find out about restricted airspace? Well, you've got your designated airspace handbook, NOTAMs, ATIS, AIP charts, and the other place you can do if you're not sure is just contact centre. And I found AvPlan and Oz Runways and these things to be quite excellent, actually, if you've got data connected to find out the status of restricted airspace. Is anybody looking at that prepared to say they're a bit overwhelmed if they had to plan a flight through there?
I fly a bit north of that.
Yeah, a lot of people would. Yeah. Yeah, they are. There's a lot to take in, and nothing replaces a little bit of guidance and actually just going out there and doing it, I suppose, and understanding them. I know when I look at flying up around airspace, I'm not familiar with going into the Gold Coast Air Show, trying to get around Amberley's airspace. I probably spend a solid 10 minutes just looking at that map, trying to sort of figure it all out, and then as I got closer to it, I was able to figure it out. It's probably better to do it on the computer before you fly, but you can do it while you're flying. Next one there. There we go. So can we plan to fly through prohibited, restricted or danger area? Prohibited, no. No, you can't. We don't have a lot of prohibited airspace in Australia. I don't even know if we have any. Technically speaking, it might not be designated prohibited, but there's certainly airspace that's H24 restricted that you'll never get through. Right here around Woomera, air weapons ranges and places like that, I think that they only have restricted airspace, but you'll never get a clearance through there. It's RA3. And restricted area depends on the RA number as to whether you can plan to fly through there or whether you're just wasting your time. Now, danger areas are always outside controlled airspace. Anyone want to have a guess why? We don't have danger areas inside controlled airspace? We just separate it. If there's a rifle range, as there is right next to the control tower at Townsville Airport, we don't fly people over the rifle range when the range is active. We've got templates to apply. So if we've got skydivers dropping on the at Point Ormond through the control zone steps before they leave, we keep aircraft away from the skydivers. So all of your danger areas will tend to butt up to the bottom of controlled airspace, even though the activity might go to 10,000 feet. That part...
Still give on the request, you give the status of the danger areas.
The danger area, yeah, that's right. So in the case of that Point Ormond danger area, which if we can see on the map is here somewhere, there it is, about there, that danger area, if you look at the status of it, it's hours of daylight only, and I think it's hours of daylight, it's always active, but whether it's being used or not is another story. So you can find out if it's actually being used at the time. Our procedures internally to just do a broadcast to all stations that might be using the VFR coastal lane. Your procedures as the pilot, for the cost of diverting left about 5 degrees for a minute, I just tend not to fly through that Point Ormond danger area if I can avoid it. But it's up to you. You know, if you want to fly through it, you can fly through it. No one's going to stop you. So we've got a danger area up here, danger area 353. So based upon what I've just said, although this restricted area 359, although it's marked as 360 on this, but it's currently 359, has certain vertical limits. If 359 is active, then this danger area is active. If 359 is not active, well, the danger area is not active because there's no airspace, you can just blast right on through. That kind of makes sense, eh? There's no need to use this danger area here if the airspace around it is not activated. If the PC-21s aren't tearing around, then you can just go, in fact, I've flown right over the top of East SAAA when it's not open, and there's a guy doing arrows over the top of it, so I decided to stay to the left of the lake, and he went to the north of it, and we're all happy. So if the airspace is not active, it's just like Ballarat or Bendigo or anywhere else. You can fly right down to circuit height if you want to, without, as long as you don't touch the ground. I don't think you're getting too much trouble. And then we've got this little, you'll see this restricted airspace step here. What they've done in this case is we have this restricted area, goes from the surface to 6,000, here, it starts at 1,000 feet. So, in fact, this part here, below 1,000, is what? Class G, yeah. When the control tower at SAAA is open, that's not controlled airspace. And you can read all about it down here. So there's all different, and here will tell you a frequency. There's frequent helicopters chopping across there, so there's a little bit of an explanation. So here's a little bit of trivia for you. All the restricted areas in Victoria start with a 3. Queensland, they start with a 4, because that's the postcodes of where they are, so that helps to kind of find them. Yeah, it took me 20 years to make that connection. So planning through restricted airspace, we'll get off restricted airspace in a moment. I guess the point I wanted to make is you want to know what type of airspace that is. So if it's an RA2, pilots must not flight plan through the restricted area unless it's on a route specified in ERSA Gen flight planning, and clearance even then is not assured. So if we skip back to here, you'll see we've got RA2 airspace, because I've looked that up, I know what it is, and you've got this little VFR lane to West Sail. If East Sail is open and you want to go to West Sail, you can flight plan into that restricted airspace, even though it's RA2, provided you plan via that route. And you will need a clearance, as opposed to here where you don't. And here you're OCTA. This is actually OCTA. It's a danger area when that airspace is active. So, yeah, you can flight plan in, you can call up via the procedures that would be in ERSA FAC, East Sail. It'll tell you how to get into West Sail. So you read their airspace and it'll have VFR procedures. It'll probably say something like, exactly what's written there. See these stars here to here? If you're planning on going into West Sail, put a flight plan in, squawk, whatever they tell you to squawk, it might be 2,000 or 1,200 or I don't know, 0100, and then contact clearance delivery out here, and then they'll speak to Sail approach, and then they'll give you a clearance in, they'll tell you to report on the ground or whatever the procedures might be. So that's where you find these procedures. True. And here we've got an RA3. And if we have a look at the Puckapunyal description from the Designated Airspace Handbook, conditional status RA3, it's H24, surface to 5,000, and it's controlled by the Army. So you can call up centre and ask them, oh, I need to go through Pucka, and they'll say, well, clearance is just not available. I don't know what sort of requirements. Maybe if you're a fire bomber, in fact, even if you're a fire bomber, you could be FFR priority and there's a fire right next to the runway at Pucka, the controllers will issue you a safety alert for entering restricted airspace without a clearance. They'll probably do it anyway, but they need to, probably the guy in charge of the radar room, needs to ring up the Pucka dude, who is the controlling authority, and ask to have that restricted area released. Say, can I have that restricted area released to me? And the guy will say, I'll call you back. Then he's got to call a range safety officer and say, can you confirm you're not firing? Check fire, land your aircraft, we're releasing that restricted airspace back to the cities. So that's the process, that's how it works, and that's why they're not going to be in too much of a hurry to approve bug smashers to poodle on through a little restricted area. So solutions are, can you go through there at 5,000, or do you need to be 5,500 or 6,000? On the lines out. You can be at 5,000, all right? And you can't be below the surface. I don't know, maybe. Yeah, that's right. People have done it. Alrighty, and ESAIL, RA2, as we found out, you're not to flight plan through there unless it's on a specified route, and then even then you might not get a clearance. And then we've got RA1. RA1 is your friend. Just treat it like, so if you're flying into Williamstown, not that we can, it's a PPR airport, you won't get it, but presumably QantasLink have got that sorted because they fly in there. So QantasLink, for example, can fly into and plan to fly into RA1, Williamstown Restricted Airspace. We can plan to fly straight through there and get the same control service. And that's normally what I do if I'm going past Willie. I don't worry about their lanes, I just request a clearance, and I've never been knocked back yet, even at 85 knots. If they can't do it, they just say, no, they can't do it, clearance not available, and they'll offer you something else. Go to Elmer Bay, I think last time I got something in Elmer Bay. I don't mind flying that VFR lane to the back, I really like it if the weather's all right. Okay, so that's restricted airspace. There's nothing to be too worried about. Just understand the status, find out based on that whether you should bother planning through it or not, and if you think you've got a shot, just plan through it. Worst case scenario, the controlling authority will tell you it's not available, and then have plan B worked out, whether you go through one of the danger areas or a VFR lane over the top, around it, or just do what most people do, wait till they're shut. Fly on Saturday or something. Okay, yeah, that's what most people do, I guess, right? We've probably already been over a lot of this stuff. So that's the danger area there. Danger areas, always ACTA, otherwise we just sort it out ourselves. In this example, it's only danger area when it's active. Yeah, we've been through that. And there's the limits there, surface to 1500, and flight commander of SAAA, so we'll skip through that one. Right, so that's one way of keeping aeroplanes safe in the air, is just segregating incompatible activities. That's basically what a strict area is for. But we can't keep aeroplanes away from each other forever. We can't just have like one airplane airborne at a time. So once we get to the point where we're trying to squash a whole bunch of planes in, which is what happens at airports, or get them past each other, then we get into the air traffic control bit. So our job as controllers is to manage the safe and orderly flow of aircraft. This is straight off the Airservices website, and across the airspace that we're responsible for. We may provide service from gate to gate, or it might just be limited to one stage of your flight. The further down the hierarchy of airspace you get from Class A, basically, the less service you can expect to receive. There is classes A, B, C, D, E, F and G. We just don't have any F in Australia that I know of, but it's kind of, think of it as like a controlled air route between two airports. I don't think we have them here. So Class G, you don't get very much. So now we're not worried about keeping out of restricted airspace. We're going to focus on controlled airspace below 10,000. If you're going to be flying in Class A, I hope that this brief doesn't give you anything new. It's actually the most complex as we get lower as well. Once you get up to Class A, you basically got the whole place to yourself. It's IFR only, full following. It's very easy. Alrighty. So this is Australia's area of responsibility, decided in some convention in ICAO in, I don't know, Canada or maybe New York. They've got a couple of headquarters. And there's a Brisbane FIR and the Melbourne FIR, stands for Flight Information Region. And you can see the Melbourne FIR is quite big and includes a fair bit of Sydney. So pretty much all of the controllers doing Perth approach and that, they're all co-located in Melbourne now. The RAAF guys are located elsewhere, and same thing for Brisbane. All of the controllers for this region are located in Brisbane. We've got a bit of redundancy set up around the joint as well, as you'd probably expect. And the tower controllers at this stage are all co-located with their particular airports, but there is of course a move to go to digital towers, which is kind of exciting. Exciting can go two ways, can't it? This is a basic breakdown as to how airspace works. You will have heard people refer to the inverted wedding cake and that sort of thing. Yeah, that's sort of true. Moorabbin would qualify as a Class D tower. Right now, it's what? Probably G. I don't think they're open right now. So when the tower is open, that airspace is Class D. And it's basically, it's a controlled airspace that surrounds general aviation regional airports. And then we've got Class C, which is there the airport. So Avalon is D when it's open, so I work at Avalon and Essendon. And Essendon when it's open is Class C because it's inside Melbourne Airport's control zone basically. We're only 2.5 miles apart, which is annoying because the minimum radar standard we need is 3 miles. So we basically never have a radar standard with Melbourne Airport, which is why it's a bit tricky sometimes. And then we've got Class E. I'm very happy to spend a bit of time talking about that. That's the most misunderstood class of airspace ever invented. And we're not going to speak about A or B or F. And G, we know, is not controlled. You can still access some some surveillance and flight following services. You won't get a control service. So we're probably getting into the weeds. This is where I'll simplify things a little bit, where, yeah, you can ask for certain controller services, and depending upon their workload and whether you're IFR or VFR, what the weather's like and those sorts of things, you may or may not get it. So if you're flying around the coast here and you ask the approach controller for flight following, they're going to probably say no. Should have thought of that before you got airborne. I'm just too busy. I'm doing Avalon approach, Essendon approach, Melbourne approach concurrently, one guy, and then you call him up and ask if he can just keep an eye on you for traffic while you fly ACTA around the bay on a city scenic. But yeah, if you call up at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning, there's nothing going on, they'll say, yeah, no worries, Squawk 1355, you're identified 3 miles north of Point Norman, have a nice flight. And then at some point they'll get busy or get bored of you and they'll just tell you, surveillance service is terminated. They'll just cut you off. So yeah, you can get certain, you can ask for, well, I think when I did my biannual flight review years ago, the instructor took me up somewhere up here. We went under the bag, we flew around for a little while. We did the unusual attitude recovery, and okay, off it comes now. Let's do the loss procedure. All right. Melbourne Centre, whatever the course name was, what? Request position information advice. Squawk right in. Whoop. He said, and I said, request position information advice as well as a suggested heading to the nearest suitable airfield with a 400 metre runway. Okay, you're 7 miles northeast of Romsey. Fly heading 240. You'll be overhead Romsey in 7 minutes. Thank you. Not like that, he says. Not like that. All right. Well, if you want to get a map and paper out like you're still in the 40s, you be my guest. So we can do all sorts of stuff in Class G. Generally speaking, it's never controlled, right? It's never controlled. You're not in, even if I wanted to give you a control instruction to keep you safe, I can't. You're outside controlled airspace now. So what we can do is give you suggested headings, and we can give you unsolicited traffic avoidance advice if I see 2 aircraft that I know are converging. It's why it's important to be on the correct centre frequency, 1357 or 1268. Just be monitoring it. You never have to establish two-way contact. I'd even say most controllers would prefer you didn't. If everyone did that, we'd have 10 people saying, just for information, I'm just flying around. Oh, thanks, mate, that's helpful. But if I see that I've got someone tracking southbound over water at 1,000, someone northbound over, I will say, safety alert, traffic over water, southbound and northbound, 1 mile east of Avalon, both at 1,000, suggest you both turn right now. The life you saved may be your own. And people will normally comply with that. So that's Class G. You want to spend a bit of time on Class E? Yeah, I would think so. Okay, so Class E is controlled airspace. There are controllers out there looking at it. It's available to IFR and VFR, IFR and I might have to check on special VFR. I don't know about special VFR, but anyway. The thing about E that makes it a bit different is, as a VFR aircraft, you do not need a clearance. You never need to establish two-way communications. You are expected, or you do require a VHF radio. You must be monitoring the correct frequency. You must have an ADS-B out transponder with mode Charlie selected and on. There will be places where you can still get away with an old mode Charlie, but for our purposes, I'm just going to say ADS-B. And the reason I say ADS-B is because the time will come, it's just inevitable, that someone somewhere is going to say, if you want to fly above, let's just pluck a number, 4,500 feet indicated, or 3,000 feet above obstacles in Australia from now on, it's going to be in Class E, and you must have an ADS-B out transponder, and you must have a VHF radio. If you don't do that, then you can join the paramotors and hang gliders down at 2,000 feet, no worries. But the day's going to come where that's kind of what the taxpayer is going to demand of us. So the sooner we get this sorted out, probably the better. And they'll put on more controllers, and we'll be able to see full visibility of where everyone is in Class E and give directed traffic information as required. IFR aircraft in Class E are given full following and given directed traffic on other IFR aircraft, but not separated, I'm pretty sure. That's one that someone can pick on me for. I'm not sure if IFR is separated from IFR and E. I don't think they are, but they're definitely under control. So you can tell I don't do a lot of Class E stuff, right? And I fly VFR when I do. Class C, that's the gold class service, the red carpet. Your full control, full flight following, separated, not just traffic. VFR from VFR and VFR from, or wouldn't really have VFR from special VFR, but VFR from VFR is not separated, and special VFR from special VFR due cloud is not separated. But if you're special VFR due viz, you are, for obvious reasons. You can't see each other. Okay, so if you're coming into land at Essendon Airport or Melbourne Airport, VFR, you'll call for a clearance, you'll be identified, and you'll just be told exactly how to track, and at some point you'll be told, guess what, pal, you're now on left base. And, oh, that's nice, I haven't done my downwind checks. Alrighty, so a lot of time you'll want to get a clearance because you actually want to land at the destination airport, like say Essendon Airport might be where you want to land. Other times you just want to get a clearance straight through the zone. And this is probably the bit where we're going to go a little bit off script. To improve your prospects in most classes of controlled airspace, and remember, it's my job on the line if you don't do what I require. Keep that in the back of your mind when the air traffic controller starts to lose their nana, right? You need to at least be equipped with ADS-B out, a transponder and a VHF radio. You've got to be able to speak English, and if you don't sound like you know what you're doing, you're probably not going to get a good result. It's as simple as that. You're flying one aeroplane at a time, the controller's got normally 3 or 4 would be pretty quiet, could be 7 or 8. Anything above 8 starts to get to the point where you might even want to invite someone else to open up another controlling position, because it goes to 10, you're in trouble. Okay, so it depends where you're working. Approach controllers can do 10 at a time, but tower controllers can get a bit tricky. Okay, so essentially how ATC works, and we'll come back to the reason why it's better if you sound like you know what you're doing. Every air traffic controller has one piece of the pie, and what we do is we essentially wait for the guy to our left to give us an aeroplane, and then we give that plane to the guy on our right, who may or may not be physically located in the same state. So that's an Airservices thing. This is just a stock photo, but that's Paul, he's retired now, and Benny, he's the UTS at Essendon these days, I think, and that's Melbourne City in the background. So that's the actual tower facility at Essendon. It is old, but it also, we haven't had these strips run out of batteries or lose power yet. And it all works. Like, the bottleneck in our running airports is the fact that we've got rules to apply on the runway. It's not really the technology we use. We only need a set of binos and a radio that works, and we can pretty much run all day on that. So these strips are a physical manifestation as to who has jurisdiction over the aircraft. So if you have a look in front of Croppy there, he's got quite a few blues waiting to depart, and a couple of yellows he's got to pass across to Benny. I don't know what Benny's doing. No one knows what Benny's doing. So the ground controller, his job, her job, I'm going to say his, I'm not going to keep going backwards and forwards. His job is to get the plane from the apron to the runway, and then once the aircraft is vacated, from the runway back to the apron again. And at a bigger airport, Sydney or Melbourne, no one wants to be doing ground when it's busy. That's the hardest job of the lot. At somewhere like Essendon, it's not a job we even bother opening most of the time. You just do it all combined, or it's where the trainee starts off. So they're all different depending upon where you work. Let's just say you put your flight plan in, you want a taxi from Essendon to, we'll keep it simple, Ballarat. So you're going to go from Class C to Class G, and you'll plan direct, which would be Rockbank, wouldn't it? Like 254 track or something at 1,500 feet. So you want to go from here straight through the bottom of, you want to go about 1.5 miles south of Melbourne International, right out. If Melbourne's runway 16 for arrivals and runway 27 for departures, no one's operating south of the airfield. It's actually a pretty easy thing to do. Again, if they're 27 or 09 only, it's pretty easy to do. If they're 27 for arrivals, 37 for arrivals and departures, dead rat mode or Lazo mode or whatever, it's easy to do. So it's only really if they're 16 for departures or 34 for arrivals that getting you out on that track is tricky, or if the cloud's very low, because again, we're not 3 miles from Melbourne, so I need to be able to visually separate. So you put your wish list in, so that's what I want to do. It doesn't mean you're going to get it, right? We'll give you whatever we can. And in this case, the ground controller will take that flight plan, they'll hit the button to speak to the radar guy at Melbourne Airport and discuss the possibility of getting a release through their airspace with one of our little bug smashers. So this is what I was saying, that maybe half of what you hear on the radio is actually what's happening. We're like ducks, the little legs are kicking under the water, and you can't see that. So when you call up and say, oh, request airways, the controller there may be going, oh, look, before I answer, oh, mate, I'll just hit the button. Or any chance of a rock bank? The guy will go, no chance at all, thanks. Taxi item point Tango 17, rock bank's not available, expect Westgate. And then that gives the pilot then time to go, all right. Okay, so that's sort of how that works. Then Benny's going to wait until Paul gets the strip across, physically hands the jurisdiction over and says, here you go. By the time Benny gets that strip, he can look there and see that's the aircraft call sign, aircraft type, number of people on board, they've got the ATIS, I know where they're going, they've got a clearance, and I can see the guy ready to rock and roll. So essentially, that's what the tower controller needs to know. Then when you call next, can I beat the guy that's about to land on that runway? Can I beat the guy that's about to land on the crossing runway? If I do beat the guy who lands on the crossing runway and the guy landing on the crossing runway goes around, where am I going to put him? Because I've got a jet out that way, I've got to do a hard left. It's not going to work. So you might have to wait, or maybe the guy on the crossing runway is far enough away, I can kick him across for left base 17 and get you going. There's lots and lots of things going on. So probably the next point I'd like to make is, even though you might have been flying at Moorabbin Airport for 20 years, you only know at the best maybe 95% of what's going on. There'll be something else you don't know. Maybe there's a runway change coming up, or there's something going on that you might not know about. So whereas the guy I just took over from would have cleared you for takeoff, and then I jump in the next day and I don't, you go, oh, fish is useless. Maybe. probably there's something else going on. So you're going to get different results on different days from the same person, and you're going to get different results from different people on the same day as well. It is unfortunately a little bit up to the individual as to what sort of results that you might get. To an extent, there's enough freedom of choice there for the controllers to do a really good job of a complex situation or a bad job of a simple one. So the tower controller gets you out of the way. On arrival, it's a tower controller that basically catches everything. So I said we need 3 miles between aircraft. The approach controller can't get everyone into the same airport and keep 3 miles. At some point, that 3 miles disappears unless the weather's very bad, and that's when everyone gets slowed right down. That's why there's like 5 or 6 miles between arrivals, because we've still got to get departures out in those gaps in really bad weather, right? So we can use the Mark 1 eyeball, we can use the radar, we can use vertical separation, we can assign responsibility to the pilot to visually maintain the separation with another aircraft or to follow. There's plenty of ways that we can do that job. Generally speaking, we transition from one standard to another one. Like, you need to have a kind of a plan. Initially I'll get him going on runway heading until I can see these past this guy, then I can climb him above that heading, and then I can turn left, and we normally have a few things that we want to do. And then after the tower controller's finished with that departing aircraft, we'll hand them off to the approach controller. And again, the approach controller knows where you're going because we brief them each time. Which brings us back to how you can get the best service. So for each new aircraft received from a previous controller, we get a quick brief. And that brief is usually everything we need to know is on the radar position symbol, or it's on the flight progress strip, maybe accompanied by a couple of words. It's not much. It's usually pretty... We might just get the cops calling up, you know, Polair red, high priority, haven't even had time to put it in the system. You just tell the tower controller, he wants to go out to Westgate. Got it. As soon as he calls, clear the blast off. Just get him moving. So there'll always be a brief. So if you're calling from outside controlled airspace, this is just a stock image off the interwebs. Apart from the fact that we do get better resolution on our radar position symbols, and they do have a label which tells us who they are, if you're calling on a mode Charlie transponder with 1200 at Westgate Bridge, until you give me your call sign, I have no idea who that is. You're any one of an infinite number of things that pop up on the radar. So that's why if you're calling from ACTA, I want to know who you are, what type of aircraft you are, not because I care if you're a high wing or low wing, I want to know if you're doing 90 knots or 300, your wake, turbulence category, that sort of thing, where you are and what you want to do. And if you chuck in the fact that you've actually downloaded the ATIS as a bonus, that's pretty handy as well, because then, you know, I don't have to give you the whole lot in one hit. So tip number 1, if you want to get a clearance through the zone or into controlled airspace, just be organised. Have that stuff, know your call sign, what type of plane you're flying and where you are, tell me what you want to do so I've got a chance of giving it to you, and let me know that you've got the current ATIS, terminal information, and you'll get a pretty good result every time. Remember, you're one of maybe 7 or 8 aircraft flying around, all of them doing at least 2 miles a minute. If I can't help you right away or quickly because you haven't given me some of the things I need, you're going to stay at number 7 on my list of things to do. Come on, duckies, move. Oh, they're supposed to move. I had all my ducks in a row. That's all right. We're saying that we've got the same goals to get you going, and the way that we work, so we go back to our little radar picture here. If you've just called approaching the Westgate Bridge, oh, that's another thing that bugs me. Approaching the Westgate Bridge doesn't help at all, I'm afraid. Everyone is it's like Christmas is going to be, yeah, everyone's approaching the Westgate Bridge. I need to know that you're the aircraft that's 1 mile west of the Westgate Bridge, or estimating Westgate Bridge at time 32 would be helpful. But so when you give your location in a radar environment, give it where you actually are, not where you were 5 minutes ago, or where you know, like tell me exactly where you are by bearing in distance or overhead. The first thing I do is I want you to be number 1. I look at the radar and I go, okay, I've got flying doctors on a 4 mile final, I'm not going to put them ahead of them, and I've got this jet that's about to depart off runway 17. So can anyone visualise those? So if you're calling at Westgate, you're bang on runway 17 upwind. And I've got a King Air that's going to land on runway 26, and you're calling at the Westgate Bridge. There's no point bolting you straight to final because you're going to be in the missed approach path of the King Air or where he's landing. So what I'm likely to do, even though you're calling approaching the Westgate, I was going to tell you Alpha Bravo Charlie cleared MCG Essendon 1500. And you go, I didn't want the MCG. Or presumably you don't want to hold for 4 minutes while I get the guy off 1.7 out of the way either, and you probably don't want to crash into him, so it's MCG or nothing. So this is what we do. We look at the sequence and go, if I've got a natural sequence, well, you're never going to beat the King Air, so I'm not going to try. Like even if the King Air was at 8 miles, you might beat him to the runway, but you're not going to get off in time for the King Air. That's the next thing. Like, I could beat that guy. You could, but the next exit on 2.6 is like 900 metres down the runway, and you're flying in a little bug smasher that's going to have a threshold speed of 55 knots. King Air's still going to be doing 100. Is the slowest that they'll be doing at 2. So I don't want a King Air 1.5 miles but kind of lighter, it's just touched down and can't vacate for a kilometre. So there's lots of things that we have to think about. It's, oh, well done, Bog Rat, you got the guy on the ground first, excellent. Now he's going to send the King Air around because he can't get off the runway. So we don't muck up a perfectly good natural sequence. We want to keep that right. So if we manage to actually pick the sequence correctly, then we just have to make that sequence work. And that's where you guys come in as the pilots. We will give instructions like clear to MCGS, and someone reads back MCGS and a 1500, excellent, I'll write that down. I will take my eyes off you now and I'll start to look at this guy that wants to depart off runway 17. Will I get the guy off 17 through the runway intersection before the landing on the crossing runway? At this stage it's looking pretty bloody good. So I go to the departures guy, I say next, Global Express whatever, off runway 17. The departures guy wants to turn him left 130, right towards the MCG. That's not going to work. So I'll say next, request heading 170 until out of 2,500. So now I'm going to get this guy straight ahead till out of a vertically separated level from the guy coming off the MCG. And the departure control go, yeah, no worries. 170 reaching 2,500, turn me heading on 030, or call me on heading. So you read all that back. So I'll tell that to the Global Express, fly heading 170 visual, reaching 2,500, turn left heading 030, runway 17, clear for takeoff. He'll read all that back, and I'll watch him go. At this point, I look back and see where my King Air is. 2 mile final, yep, good. Is there any wake turbulence through the intersection with the Global Express? Not where he's going to touch down. Is the Global Express doing what I told him to do? Yes. Where the hell is that lighty? If I look up and find you've already just entered in from Westgate Bridge and you're now 2.5 miles and closing direct at the jet, because you haven't done what I asked you to do, all right, so there's a lot of monitoring goes on, and we need to have that plan in mind. And that's why I come back to saying, depending upon how much confidence I've got that you're going to do what I've asked, I go, you know what, I don't know who this guy is. They didn't have the ATIS. What's in it for me? Clearance not available. Remain outside Class Charlie airspace. Expect inbound clearance via the Westgate Bridge in about 3 minutes. Rightio. And I'll just clear it, and I'll give that jet left 130, off you go. As soon as he's out at 2,500, or as soon as he's dropped his left wing, actually, I can see you, you're now cleared direct. So there's many ways to do to get through the problem. On the one hand, I've given you exactly what you want, taken on a bit of risk as the controller, I suppose, subject to you doing exactly what I'm expecting. My plan only works if you do what I'm expecting. Where are we here? And that's what is it. So then we'll if we do get a good sequence, if I pick it wrong, then I just have to work 3 times harder, 4 times harder to make whatever I got wrong work, the wrong sequence. And there's ways to do that, and generally it means someone gets a bit shafted, which is we call it sequencing. And depending upon what tools we have available, so if we have a radar, it makes sequencing much easier. I can just observe, and if it's a nice clear day, I can look out the window and confirm what I'm seeing on the radar is in fact the disposition is such that there's never going to be any proximity hazard. That's basically what visual separation is. If you imagine you're approaching a roundabout and you look out the right side and you see a truck with both stacks blowing smoke, he's hitting that roundabout at 90, well, you may decide to just wait, depends on where they are. If you're 50 metres from the roundabout and he's 400 metres, you're just going to continue straight through, aren't you? But if we had a radar and the standards are such that you can't do that, you'd have to stop that dude and let the truck keep going. So visual is basically the same sort of thing you'd do at a roundabout. You just look out the window for yourself and you just decide, is there going to be a proximity hazard? If the answer is yes, you stop. If the answer is no, you go. And that's pretty much what tower controllers do for a lot of the day in nice weather. If the weather's bad, as a tower controller, I don't have much to bring to the table. We're basically just working on radar or procedural standards after that, and everything gets slowed right down. Oh, there my ducks are in a row. Go duckies, that took like 4 hours, eh?
so glad it worked.
Yeah, lucky I did it at work on overtime. Okay, so picking the correct sequence, yeah, that takes years to get that right. Anything can change. What happened yesterday will not happen today because the wind's changed. Different aircraft performance, flown by the same company, same aircraft, different pilot. They'll just fly it differently today for some random reason. One of the operators that we work with up at Essendon, I won't say who, one of the pilots flying the King Air used to just randomly join at like 9 miles and pull the speed back to about 90 knots. Like, the hell are you doing? Like, what are you doing? Why would you do such a thing? And being IFR, I can't really sequence them differently. It's like, now just great, I've got all these guys that I was going to put number 2 to this King Air, but because that aircraft is capable of going from 230 odd knots at 12 miles down to 90 at 5, doesn't mean that's what I expect you to do. I work on what I'm expecting to see because I've seen this several thousand times before. So being predictable is kind of helpful. We get runway changes, medical traffic workload, a mix of different rated controllers. Not every controller is rated on every position, so depending upon their mix, and then I've got to manage my workload. Like, just because I can do all positions all day doesn't mean I want to, but maybe we have to. So there's a whole bunch of other factors that just means that your plan might not always work exactly the same. It's not that easy to pick. So when we get the sequence, we pick the sequence correctly, and then we have enough tools in the toolbox. Everyone gets a pretty good service, but if we get a bit cornered due to equipment failure or weather, it makes it a bit harder. So we put you in a sequence, and then we've got to make it work, which is what we were talking about just a moment ago. How do we make it work? Oh, well, there's a pretty fat book that we could go through together if you like, but rather than do that, in Class C airspace, IFR to VFR and IFR to IFR must be separated, and there's a bunch of minimum standards that prescribe what that means, and we can't reduce those under any way. So in Class C, it's not uncommon to be delayed outside controlled airspace or to be given control instructions. In Class D, in VMC, on a nice clear day, we only need to separate IFR from IFR and from special VFR or special VFR. So we don't need to separate IFR from VFR. So if a VFR aircraft calls to come into Avalon, even though I might have an A320 on a 4-mile final, I can just clear wherever direct. Still not have you in sight perhaps. It would not necessarily be the best thing to do on my behalf, but the rules say I don't have to separate you. So yeah, you're cleared direct to Avalon, 1,500, traffic's an A320 on a 4-mile final, runway 18. Pilot go, okay, and I'll come on in. In that situation, what I'd actually do is I'd tell them to track direct to the control tower, show landing light, and I wouldn't let them come off that track until I could see them. And it's no imposition to the pilot, but it means that worst case scenario, you're going to bang into a brick wall at the control tower and you've never come near final, and it's not cost the pilot anything. So there's ways that we can achieve really good results and still get good separation assurance as well. We can ask pilots to follow each other. So what we actually do is we use a whole combination of standards and we transition from one standard to the next to the next. So typically, as soon as an aircraft departs, we'll be using a visual separation standard as tower controllers on a nice clear day or night. And then at some point, of course, the aircraft's going to disappear over the horizon. We can't do that forever. We need to then establish before too long some kind of a vertical standard or you only need one, or a radar standard that the next agency can use. So we don't go handing off 2 blokes that aren't separated, go, here you go, Nigel. Sorry, man. It's not going to work. Can you fix it? They do that to us all the time. As tower controllers, we've got eyeballs. We can look out the window, and they'll hand us aircraft that are on a reducing separation. They're not going to actually hit. There's procedures in place, but they're not going to necessarily maintain 3 miles either. And part of the handoff is, northeast ambulance, whatever, and southwest is Polair. You're happy for Polair direct? Yep, direct to left base, early transfer, no vertical restrictions, or not below 3,000 for him and give him 2,000 by joining final and I'll sort him out. Or we sort it out amongst ourselves as to how that might work. So the way we work, so back to what this brief's about, is how do air traffic controllers actually decide this stuff? We have a sequence and then we have a plan, and then we monitor it to make sure it's working and we modify it as necessary. So depending upon how busy we are and our scan rate and what tools we have available, might depend how long it can be before we can even get back to you. Rightio. How does a pilot get it right? This is probably the most important slide of the night for many people. You just got to be organised. Know how to operate in my class of airspace. So in Class D, if you call up at Moorabbin here, and I'm not the Moorabbin expert, I've only flown in a few times, if you tell them you're at Point Ormond at 1,000, receive Charlie, whatever, they'll just tell you report left base, I think, don't they? And traffic is. Off you, and in you come. So you don't even really technically get a clearance, like they don't say you are cleared too. Whereas in Class Charlie airspace, if you don't hear those words, you don't come in. So they're a little bit different, so just understand the type of airspace. In Class E, we spoke about, be on the right transponder code, be at the correct hemispherical cruising level, be monitoring the correct frequency, just come on through. You don't need to talk to anyone if you're VFR. It does help if you submit a flight plan. It's case by case with different airspace and towers. Personally, I don't care if you put a flight plan in or not. I'll just write the strip out when you call. But if you want a good result, use what it says in AIP. Tell me, new flight details. Don't just go out, I'm a Cirrus doing this and that and that. And go, say again, I'll after Cirrus, because I've got to get a bit of paper out and write this stuff down. So if you put a flight plan in, you're going to get a better result usually. Make sure I start big and go small. So you start big, know what airspace you're flying into, then get the NOTAMs, then look at the ATIS, so you're getting more and more detail as you get closer to the airport, and brief yourself on the ERSA. I always find it funny that we get guys that have flown literally from Honolulu, they've been flying for 12 hours, they land at Essendon. Can you tell me how to get to Pacific Aviation? What have you been doing for the last 12 hours, man? You didn't have enough time to just flip open ERSA and see where it is, like, seriously, man. So don't be that dude. Just at least read ERSA before you arrive and understand, is there fuel there? Like, you know, times people cop going, oh, the fuel's not answering. No, that's because you knocked off at 6 o'clock as per ERSA, and then you want me to fix it up for you. And have your transponder set up to go. So if you call up approaching the zone boundary and you've got a flight plan, I'll use my Rego as an example, or my old one, Essendon Tower, Zulu Echo India, CH750, 2 miles west of the Westgate Bridge, 1,500 POB1, received echo, request inbound airways clearance. I'll just go, there's the strip, that's exactly what he said, there's the guy, exactly where he said he's going to be, he's got the ATIS. All right, you're going to get it. You'll get a clearance. Might be Westgate, might be Balti, might be MCG, it might be enter on a heading of 040, who knows what it'll be, but you'll get a clearance. Sound like you know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, and you sound like you know what you're doing, you'll get a clearance. It may become apparent that you don't know what you're doing. Okay, so keep this in mind, that every time I give someone a clearance that saves them 30 seconds or a minute, it might involve me then having to work a bit harder or be a bit more inventive. I don't want to make it sound like we take risks, but we do. You have to, right? You can't cross the road. Nothing in life can happen without taking on some level of risk. So every time I clear someone into my zone, I've added another player to the game, which was going just fine before you turned up. You need to sort of know what you're doing. Sorry in advance if I get a bit tense when you turn 90 degrees without telling me, or you're flying at 60 knots when normally I've only ever seen a Cessna 210 to 140. There's just things that we expect, and if we don't get what we expect, our plan doesn't work, and if our plan doesn't work, I've got to go back and fix it, and that one dude has just created 80% of my workload. So that's what we're trying to avoid. If I'm not convinced that you'll do exactly as I ask, when I ask, and in the way that I expect, I just won't give you a clearance. You'll get one eventually, and I'm not talking in half an hour, it might be 2 minutes, or 90 seconds, or it might be something different to what you'd otherwise prefer, but I'll just have to tidy up a few things. I'll get the Glex going, I'll make sure the King Air's actually landed, and then I can block up his missed approach path by giving you a clearance in. So you might just do one orbit. It's not going to be the end of the world. And that's why I say here, if you're not familiar with the procedure of the airport, and I do this, and the people who are working the tower at the Gold Coast, they know me, I trained half of them, and they know and I'll call that something unfamiliar, no worries, fishy, and they'll just transit the zone on a heading of 180 visual. Oh, thanks. They're not going to tell me to go via Mrs. Mac's Pie Shop and then cross the I don't know, some bloody bridge somewhere I've never heard of. So it just means you might not get the most expeditious of tracking. You might not get your choice of level, but at least they're not worried about, they go, okay, not familiar. If I was ever to fly into Moorabbin again, I would absolutely be declaring that I'm unfamiliar. I'd call up about a minute and a half before the inbound point. I'd be well briefed. Rego, unfamiliar. The controller is not going to think that you're a muppet or unprofessional, but actually quite the opposite. Everyone happy with that? Everyone believe it? It's true.
Are you getting annoyed with unfamiliar?
No, I hardly ever hear it. Probably once every 3 months someone will tell me that they're unfamiliar. Yeah, it's very rare. It's not so rare that people come in that don't know what they're doing though. That's what I'm saying. So we've sort of finished up. I don't know if we're on time or how are we tracking?
Yeah, pretty good, fine.
Oh, that's not too bad. So have you got some questions there, Alex?
I've got nothing at the moment.
Nothing?
Anyone have any questions?
Oh, Dina's got some. Just yell them out, Dina.
Oh, there isn't it?
You got them? Rightio.
You might want to repeat them so people can...
Yeah, we'll do that. Okay, let's see how we go. How are aircraft without transponders handled in Class D? Okay, so not all controlled airspace is what we call surveillance airspace, but I think with ADS-B that's going to change. And certainly around controlled airports it will, and it already has in some, like Mackay for example, and Rocky, they were procedural towers. They had Class D up to about 4,500 feet. Now I think they have Class D down to about 2,000, and above that is surveillance controlled airspace of some sort. Might be D, it might be C, I'm not sure, but it's done by Brisbane and no one goes in and out of there without a transponder. But what happens if your transponder breaks and you want to get back to Avionics 2000 to get it fixed at Essendon? It's really no problem, just call up nil transponder. So now I can't use any radar standards to separate you, and I need to somehow get you in. Now if I've just got 2 VFR aircraft flying in the circuit and you want to call up at, I don't know, MCG, I'll clear you straight in because I don't have to separate VFR from VFR. If I don't have to separate you from anything, there's no reason I can't clear you in with or without a transponder. I could clear you in no radio if we did it on the phone. Would I? Would my local instructions at my particular airport allow me to do that? That's another story, but there's not a reason in the manual air traffic why we couldn't. So, yeah, no transponder, you, especially if you haven't actually had some other failure. Like if you were to call up and say, my alternator's failed, my transponder stopped working, that would be time to declare a pan, I think, because I'm going to have to assume that your radio is going to fail before you even land. I'd clear visual approach, clear to land, cross the runway, and nothing else would move until you're at parking. How well do VFR flight following work in Australia? It's workload permitting, either inside or outside controlled airspace. I will ask for it. Like I flew from Serpentine in Perth, if you know where that is, basically Perth to Nullarbor non-stop, 7.7 hours about 3 weeks ago in my little plane, and I was at flight level 115. So I just called up, and that was all OCTA, Class G, but I did advise the controller to say, by the way, if you're running with that duties with 65 knots indicated airspeed at 11,000 feet, that's me if you need me. Yeah, no worries. I didn't ask for flight following, but they did give me a discreet code. They said, yes, squawk that. So at some point they must have had ADS-B coverage out there. I wasn't even aware, but they called up. And then I was just flying along for about another hour or two, and they just got sick of me. I think they said, surveillance service terminated, squawk 1200. All right, 1200. So they just, sometimes they, I think, like I've flown over the Snowies in Class G, and I got a code when I left Canberra, and they left me on that code the whole way, because I think the next controller was taking it. It's gone, I'll just leave them on that code. If I know who it is, I can talk to them. They don't know who I am personally, I don't think, the radar guys, but sometimes they like it. So flight following, you'll get it if it suits the controller. If you insist on it and you have some reason why, I'd suggest you put it in the flight plan, maybe even precede it with a phone call to the radar guys. So the guys doing low-level surveys, the fire bombers, they're all VFR. They get flight following, I'm pretty sure.
So when you do, because I use flight following a lot in the States, it's
Yeah.
standard over there, and they're very good, and every time you go from one control zone or RTC,
They hand you over.
they hand you over, they give you, the pressure, and they take you, and you keep on the same code all the way through, pretty much until you're visual.
With the airport.
With the
Is that in
airport.
Class B?
No, that's
G.
Class G.
Yeah,
It's class,
yeah.
just VFR flight.
Yeah.
So just Class G. But I was just wondering if it was similar, because here I've heard, I haven't tried it.
It could be, but we don't.
But when you go from one frequency to another frequency, they don't necessarily hand you over.
If you're flight following, they will.
They will hand you over.
Yeah. Even if you're Class G VFR, if you request flight following, they'll do it. And then as you're approaching the green line on your moving map, and it'll tell you next frequency 13355 or whatever, they'll tell you.
Beautiful.
They might say contact, they might say monitor, call me again on this. They will push you down the line. as you go, yeah. We're a bit reluctant to hold SAAA times in Australia because we have a SAAA agency for that, so for flight following they'll certainly pass your traffic and keep an eye on you, but a VFR aircraft requesting to hold a SAAA time for landing at Fraser Island or wherever they're going, there's actually a system for that, and that's what you should be using, but I don't want to speak outside of my wheelhouse, which is tower. That's more of an en route or an approach thing, but if you get the right person on the right day, they'll do whatever they feel like doing versus what you're entitled to, which might be less than that. The pilots of which airlines are most competent? I think you can just expect that if you're flying a Chieftain and all you do is night freight, you expect that they're probably not going to be as experienced as someone who's flying a 787 out in Narita. But actually, very rarely do I have an operator flying a commercial operation, especially a passenger carrying one or freight, where I've had concerns that they're not up to the job. You're only ever given access to the job that you're capable of doing, you know. If we had any real concerns and it was reproduced time and again, then yeah, I would certainly be speaking to the chief pilot. That's normally the first course of action. So Airservices Australia and the Department of Defence, we are not the regulator. All right, CASA is the regulator, and in no way, in the same way that an air traffic controller, we consider CASA in the same way perhaps as a pilot might consider CASA when it comes to who's your friends. But no, they write the rules and they're responsible for enforcing them, and we operate within them, just like pilots do, right? We're not like motivated in any way to shortcut them or do anything different. That's just the tool set we work with, and it really, like, you go through this phase as in your maturing as a controller, I suppose, but you get to the point where it's like, I just can't clear that guy in. There's not a rule that allows me to do it. So you don't, and you don't care. It's like, oh, well, I can't do it. When you can, you do. So we don't like cut corners or do anything like that. It's just how it is. So how do we get onto that? Talking about which ones. So yeah, okay, so if there is a pilot that I have concerns with, I don't call CASA straight away. If you do something wrong, short of an immediately reportable matter, which has to get reported, but it's like, geez, that guy's airmanship is a bit dodgy. Like, he flies his chopper at 100 knots through the apron. Like, don't really need to do that. You ring the chief pilot and you have it out. You have a talk to him about it. And one of the things about air traffic control too is, at your local airport, you might win the battle, but you'll never win the war. If we decide that you're just not someone that should be flying, they'll get you eventually. Like, you're just not going to produce results for your employer, because it's like, the last time I launched that guy, they shafted me. Every time that guy comes in, they do something weird, which makes my licence lines. I'm lining it up at the shredder. I'm ready to feed it in every time this guy calls. Bugger that. You can just wait until there's no one else around. So you want to be predictable. You want to demonstrate good airmanship, because it's just the only way it's going to work for you. Same way that if you depended upon the local cop giving you permission to join the traffic, and every time you get in your car you drive like a tool, you're not going to get that permission very easily, are you? So it's not hard to understand. The best plans to remain OCA, I'm not sure what that one might be. How far in advance does ATC prefer the pilot to set their transponder? Yeah, that's a good question. Probably, I don't know, 90 seconds, something like that, or about a minute. So it only takes between about 3 and 5 seconds for the change of code to go from 1200 to 0100, for example, to appear on the radar. And then it depends upon my scan observing that. And I'll see a predicted track line that says in 1 minute this aircraft is going to be overhead one of our inbound reporting points. So the fact that you've changed the code and in 1 minute you're going to be at an inbound reporting point, I'm going to start looking, well, if you're coming in from, let's say you're coming in from Moorabbin, I'll look to see who's flight planned to come in from Moorabbin that fits that speed profile and has asked to come in via the MCG. I go, okay, it's one of 2 aircraft. One of them is a chopper. So I look out the window, not a chopper. I'll grab a strip out and I just expect it's probably going to be that aircraft. So, yeah, Dan.
Sorry, because my question, for example, if I'm doing the CG audit,
Oh.
I would put the SMW
Code?
code, let's say, somewhere around Altona.
Yeah, that'll be
And I
fine.
would call in Williamstown.
Yep.
So some people, like I remember in flight training, we would put a transponder way before that.
So,
So what would be the best practice?
so the question was, if we put the transponder on, like, say, 4 minutes early, what's the worst thing that happens? I would say that if you're still in the jurisdiction of the centre, let's say you're flying in a busy coastal lane, and then you're now on 0100, the centre controller may believe there's a pretty good chance you're no longer even on their frequency anymore. So if I was to give directed traffic information to 2 observed unidentified aircraft, I would direct it to the guy that's still squawking 1200, and I'd probably hit the hotline to the tower controller at Essendon. For you, I've given traffic to the 1200 down there at Point Ormond, and then he just hang up. And then we'd be on the radio going, traffic southbound at Point Ormond, safety alert, opposite direction traffic, over land, left 11 o'clock, 1.5 miles, same level, blah, blah, blah. And we just keep coming out with that until we see you turn. We just keep spewing out the traffic avoidance advice. So there's no real harm in selecting the code, the transponder code early. It's just that the rules say you should be on 1200 if you're VFR or ACTA. So if you go off that, we're expecting you to call for clearance soon.
Sorry, just a related question. Again, Essendon and City Orbit. Usually for City Orbit, I wouldn't file a flight plan.
No, I don't care if you file a flight plan.
For the City Orbit.
Yeah, so...
Do you prefer to have the flight plan, which takes literally like 2
No, I don't personally. So the question was, do you prefer City Orbit for a short-term air work? So we've got City Orbits. If you have a look in Ursa or Essendon, or you can search through AIP special procedures. Nowhere does it describe what a City Orbit is. Is it right around the Hoddle grid, or is it 4 miles away? You're going to overfly Moonee Valley Racecourse, Doncaster, because I've seen it. Again, it comes down to, please just do what I'm expecting you to do. But when a pilot, you say, yeah, cleared for a right City Orbit, and they help themselves to Moonee Valley Racecourse, so long as they're keeping the city on their right and at the level, they're not doing anything wrong. And that's what I have to tell these controllers when I'm training or whatever, say, careful, what you said and what he read back might not be what you expected. Just keep it in mind. You've got to monitor. So if you need someone to go for a closed City Orbit, you say, you're cleared for a City Orbit, 1,500, no further than 1 mile from the main built-up area, or just add some description, nail them in. As for whether you need a flight plan or not, personally, I don't really care, because otherwise we might have 25 people who've planned to do a City Orbit that day, of which 6 turn up. In the meantime, I've got whatever 25 minus 6 is, no one knows, worth of extra strips stacked there all day long, and at some point they'll go, look, this guy should have done that orbit 4 hours ago. I now can chuck it out. And of course, 5 seconds later they call up because they don't know how to do daylight savings UTC.
So, in relation to that question about city orbits and the like, or anything where you file a flight plan, are they kind of like printed out?
Yeah. It's a variable system parameter. So 40 minutes before that flight is due to taxi, it'll be printed out for our reference. So if you taxi 45 minutes early, we'll just tell you, hang on a second, we'll have to look it up and print it and that sort of thing. And then at about the time you're due into our zone, it'll print out for arrivals as well. So it depends what it's been programmed for each system.
And does it print it out in that, like in the AIP, in that cryptic manner?
Yes and no. It's different at each airport, unfortunately. Essendon hasn't really been updated since maybe at least 10 years, more like 15 years. So we do get that AVFAX style printout. We manually transcribe the call sign, the flight rules, the aircraft type, your point of origin, your level, everything gets written out on this little grid thing. And then depending upon which numbers are written in which box, they mean certain things. It could be a runway number, it could be minutes after the hour, it could be a level, just depends on where it's written. And then that's dropped into a physical placeholder that gives us a mental map of where everybody is and who's responsible for that aircraft. So
that the strip is almost prepared in advance?
yeah, or we can write it out in real time. And that's why if Dina was to call me up and say, oh, SM Tower, Tango Alpha Oscar, new flight details for City Orbit, I just know straight away she's going to get a City Orbit, man, because I can then get the correct coloured strip, whack it in the bay, look to see who's squawking 0100 approaching the MCG or whatever, and then work out where they're going to fit. Tango Alpha Oscar, Essendon Tower. That's all you'll get. 2 miles south of MCG, 1,500, PRB2 received Bravo, requesting clearance. Cleared for left City Orbit, 1,500. Climb to 2,000, cleared for left City Orbit, traffic 500 feet beneath. I can offer you a right City Orbit, or you can hold for 1 minute, Point Ormond advice, depending on what's going on. So that's how it works. And I can just write that out as I go. It doesn't take very long to write VFR, RV, what are you at, a 6? What's yours? 12, sorry. Oh, that does take twice as long.
Not as long as yours.
Yeah, so I can write VFR RV12 TAO just as quickly when they call as I can off a flight plan, which I've got to try to interpret what's relevant to me. Because there's stuff in that flight plan that's relevant to the Moorabbin controller that I don't care about. We just pick out the little bits that we need. Probably every other tower in the world would have at least a strip printer, so that some of that process is taken out, and most places have electronic flight strips as well. It's just that they've been deliberating over updating Essendon for about 30 years. So,
James, when you said like 12 and 6, let's say, usually when we ask for city orbit, and I talked to them for attention, they like last time they asked again what type of the aircraft. Usually we would say RV. They didn't ask specifically it was RV12
No.
or RV6.
no, so
But as we know, it's
as a controller,
very different.
I want to know that you're a low wing single and you're doing about 130 knots.
I'm
That's
not doing 130 miles.
What speeds of 12 do? What do you fly on? 100.
110?
There you go, 100 then. That's all I want to know. So I call up, I'll say I'm a CH750. No one knows what that is. No one. So I don't do that. I'll say I'm a VFR CH75, which is basically like a Cessna 150. And the controller goes, oh yeah, good. They wrote CH75 on there, but now they're picturing a high wing single that does about 80 knots.
So
That's all we need to know.
controllers are with different types of aircraft? How wide their knowledge of Bosch?
An enthusiast like myself would probably know quite a few, but most, especially like an approach controller, they're all green dots. It doesn't make any difference to an approach controller really. We want to know if you're a jet or a turboprop, or if you're a piston engine. Like, I understand probably more about how different engines work than maybe most people in this room would, because I have to control a jet coming down from 30,000 feet versus a Air Commander coming down from 16. They have very different engine handling, obligations, and a difference between an auto feather and a twin and a single. And there's different things that pilots, we assume, right, as controllers, that this pilot would prefer this type of profile. But when I was working Townsville approach, I had a aeromedical something or other, I don't know what it was, a fixed wing of some sort. I might have been a chopper, I don't know. But I just gave them direct to, it was a fixed wing. I gave them best speed vectors to beat a 7.6 coming in from somewhere to join the ILS for 0.1 and got them on the ground. And it was got a terrific service. I had to shaft the 7.6 a little bit, maybe by 40 seconds or whatever, to make it all work. He cracked the shits because he had a spinal patient on board and they didn't want the turbulence. I can't read your mind, mate. I don't know that. I just see medical priority. I'd get you on the ground as fast as I can, and that's the way I could do it. So, don't be afraid if, like I know you guys well enough now, if you called me approaching the holding point and you said you're ready, I would actually assume that you could give me a rolling departure. If you just want a simple upwind, I would assume I'd go, Tango off Oscar, runway 17, cleared for immediate takeoff. And I would expect you to roll and just keep going. If you've got a distinctive accent, if you were coming into an airport and you'd never been there before, I would not do that. Tango off Oscar, Essendon Tower, that's all you get. And then once, whatever it was, the landing and the crossing, whatever was out of the way, Tango off Oscar, maintain runway heading visual, clear for takeoff. I wouldn't rush you.
Which takes us to my next question. Sorry, I didn't write it down, but accents. How do you deal with accents?
Standard phraseology. And so there's a difference between someone having an accent and someone who can't speak English very well. Right? So I know that you can understand me just fine. I'd have no issues telling you reaching 2,500, turn left heading 030, climb to 5,000, clear for blast off.
Just slower, please.
Slower, right? Or whatever it might be. But if it was an English second language, even if they've got 1,000 hours, maintain runway heading visual, climb to 5,000, clear for takeoff, off they go. Report passing 2,500, they report, turn left heading 030. I see them do it, contact departures 1189. So we just chunk it. And if you've got multi-crew aircraft and they're locally based, and you can just give them the whole lot in one hit. You just have to pick your battles a little bit.
James, as a VFR pilot, is declaring a medical emergency a golden ticket, or do you question it? Or?
No, I wouldn't question it. The regulator can do that. I just put you in. You've just gone from perhaps not a high priority to the highest priority. If whoever today's Prime Minister is waiting in his King Air to depart, he'll have to wait for you. It's no big deal. Most of the time, There's only so, we can only speed you up by maybe a minute. As a tower controller, I've got you for 7 to 10 miles, something like that. In that time, I can only give you a minute. And even if I was to put you to the end of the line, I'm probably only going to add 4. It's not like you're going to be holding for 2 weeks. No, if you could even just say, I need priority. All right, especially a VFR pilot. I don't know if you're running out of fuel or if you're having a heart attack or what's going on, but I'm going to give it to you. I don't need you to declare a pan or a mayday. You say I need priority. All right, you can expect the safety officer to meet you and you vacate and escort you straight to parking and find out what's going on. There'd definitely be paperwork in on it, but if you need to get somewhere in a hurry, you just say I need to get there in a hurry. Sometimes we'll even use that, especially with the police chopper. I'll ask them, you know, rush? And they're like, yeah, we are on this one. Because they're really limited. They can't just declare polio red unless life is in danger. Life might be at danger, but the baddie's tearing up the Hume freeway at 180k an hour. And sometimes you just get the feeling from you guys in a real hurry, or are you happy to go number 2 to the guy on a 2 mile final? No, we're in a hurry. Right then, make you turn north of the runway intersection. Clear for takeoff, make left turn, traffic on a 1 mile final. Old mate, cancel clearance, continue approach. Or whatever it might be, you know, day or night, it's a lot different. So, yeah. Yeah.
I've got a few questions online.
Oh, go yours, yeah.
Just a situation coming into Melbourne from the north and either with a flying VFR, but with a plan or without a plan, and you come over the divide and it's socked in and not prepared for it. So before you get to the boundary, you're asked to submit an IFR plan. Is that a big deal for you guys?
So if you wanted to change flight rules to IFR, is that what you're talking about?
So you don't have a plan at all?
No, no plan at all, and now you'd like to change flight rules to IFR and continue. No, I don't think that's a big deal. You just request that on centre. The difficulty there is as soon as you're IFR, ATC is now responsible for your terrain separation and separation from other aircraft and all sorts of stuff. So if you're not already established above some kind of lower safe altitude, however you've determined that, we're in a situation that's like, well, I'm not going to give you a clearance because you're still 1,500 feet below lower safe altitude near your IFR, so how's that going to work? There are ways that can be done. The rescue choppers do it all the time. You know, there are ways it can happen, but for the most part, you kind of want to make that decision pretty early. If you're going to change your flight rules to IFR, and you just request that on the centre frequency. Wouldn't necessarily have to be accompanied by any kind of emergency call, but you can imagine that if you've been caught out by the weather, there's every chance ATC has been as well if it's unforecast, so we'll all be trying to catch up as well, changing runways and whatever else might be going on, getting works off. We may have told the groundsman he can mow around the ILS all day long and we've got to get him off and turn it back on again, and yeah, lots of things happen when the weather comes through.
So in that instance, did you just write out a strip, or would you actually...
No, a whole flight plan has to get put in.
It could be put in.
Yeah. Yep. So in the case of like, we'll keep coming back to the police air wing or whatever, they would ask their ops to do it. In the case of you and I, where we don't have an ops room to do it, then the controller will. They may ask you to call a different frequency. They'll say, I'll contact clearance delivery on this frequency, and you'll call them up and they'll take the details down and put the plan in, and then once you're established above lower safe altitude, then you'll get an airways and that sort of stuff. If you need it, you need it. What are online questions, mate?
Use the thumbs up, Alex. All right. So a couple of questions. So one from David is if he's redirected MCG because of preceding aircraft that were before him, and he actually gets the MCG before you're ready, what's his course of action at that point?
No, you've got the clearance. That's the clearance. So a clearance is your authorisation to enter controlled airspace at a time, at a level, at a point, in accordance with the instructions issued, and it's valid until you land, or we cancel it, or you leave controlled airspace.
Yep. Okay.
One of those things. So I can see where the inbound aircraft is, and I've looked at that and gone, I don't want to clear them in for about another 90 seconds, and I would prefer they were further to the east. I can achieve both of those things by not clearing you in via the most immediate point. I'll get you to the other side of the city and clear you in that way.
Yep.
So it's just another example. I've cleared guys who've called basically just east of Point Cook, inbound via Doncaster Shopping Town, because it's just, well, you're like number 7 in the sequence, mate. You're not going to land for another maybe 18 minutes. There's no point bolting you to Mooney Valley Racecourse and holding you there for 7 minutes. I may as well just keep all my ducks in a row. If everyone's landing on 2.6, I kind of want you on a big wide circuit for 2.6 to come in around that way. So,
cool.
yeah.
Back to me. Yep. And then online we've got one from Sean. Can I request and receive a transit clearance of Class C without a lodged flight plan?
Yep.
You can?
Yeah, your odds are improved if you have a flight plan in, I would imagine, for most places.
Yep.
Just because it's one less thing I've got to do. I might not have time or even access to the computer. Like the computer where I am is on the other side of the console. It's sort of like over here. And if everything I'm doing is in front of me, I don't want to be banging away at another keyboard or speaking to another controller. Because if I have to rope someone else into my little conspiracy, so if I have to talk to Melbourne Tower or to Melbourne departures north or approach east, if there's a flight plan in the system, I can just reference that plan. I would say, at Calcutta, or Zulu Echo India wants to transit the zone in Moorabbin at 2,500. Do you want to keep him? Can I have a release, or should I tell him to go around? And I go, no, I'll take him. Tell him to squawk 1345, call me. Or, no, you can have that release, or get him down to 2, you got the release. So if you've got a flight plan in, it makes it much easier. We don't have to tell the life story to a bunch of people.
Okay. And then the question was, did I hear James saying that a transponder with ADS capability is required to enter control airspace?
We're coming back to our simplifications again. No, not all controlled airspace is even surveillance. Like Alice Springs, for example, and technically Avalon. We have a radar there, we're just not allowed to use it for separation. So if I'm not allowed to use it for separation, I might as well not have it at all. It's just there as a bit of a situational awareness tool. So you don't even need a transponder at all to fly into some places. I am oversimplifying a bit, and it comes down to knowing your airspace and the procedures involved. Cool. Yeah.
One from Dov is, what happens to VFR flight plans that do not include controlled airspace, when and if they're activated at all?
Don't know, probably not activated. If I'm not on the addressee list, we'll certainly never see it. So it means probably no one would ever see it, maybe just sensor. It'll be filed somewhere. If no one actually needs to see it, no one will be posted that plan. So yeah, I guess if you took off from Ballarat and you put a flight plan in to do circuits at Ballarat, and that's all you're going to do, I don't think anyone would ever see it.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah,
I think that's all we've got from online.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that's it for me too. Thanks everyone for your attention. I hope that everyone got something out of it. Yeah, right.
Just a question, not directly related to control zones as such, but it's an IFR, VFR type question. I'm VFR, and when I plan a VFR flight, I don't look at the ERC below.
Yeah.
It's showing IFR pathways. Now, suppose I choose to buzz around at 8,000 feet in G space, and I'm above. I'm actually well above, say, down towards the coast. I'm well above some IFR grounds. It's VMC conditions. How does that play out for the controllers?
So it'd be great if you had a transponder on, so we can see you, and it'll be good if you're at a hemispherical level and you were tracking in something that's a little bit predictable, so we can base that upon whether we pass traffic to the IFR. But all the IFR OCTA is entitled to is traffic information on observed aircraft. They're not entitled to any sort of separation. They can ask, can you give me some suggested avoidance advice? Yeah, sure, mate, if I was you, I'd turn right 30 degrees, I'll let you know when you passed. And you'll probably hear that quite a bit if you're flying up coastal Queensland, and that I can't remember, I had someone racing me to Gladstone. We both basically due over Gladstone at the same time, and I'm listening the whole time, and at no point did the controller actually try to talk to me. So I just offered, well, if you like, I'll just stay west of the freeway. And the IFR guy's going, yeah, great, I'll go east of it. But there's still no separation. I don't know how close we got, might have been 1.5, 2 miles, but it didn't matter. I was just staying west of the freeway. He could see it, he's staying east of the freeway, and down we went.
I do hear, on area frequency, I sometimes hear the controller advising IFR aircraft of an unknown VFI aircraft in the vicinity.
That's it.
It's just looking to see.
That's it. Yep.
Both parties.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what ADS-B will improve quite a bit. So with an old mode Charlie transponder, if you've got 1200 in your level, all they know is there's someone squawking 1200 with a level. It could be a hot air balloon, could be a drone, I don't know. But when you've got an ADS-B out transponder, even if you select 1200, they can, with a click of a button, see your rego, call sign, everything. So they can give much better directed traffic information.
Do you need to actually call back if you know that you're that unknown that they just mentioned?
Yeah, it's up to you. Just use your judgment. Sometimes, if they say, you're going to pass 4 miles of being that aircraft in 6 minutes on descent, I wouldn't bother. Or you might just say, yeah, that's me, I will continue on this track. And, good, thanks. Yeah, Senator Zuluaka, India, I am that VFR aircraft. I will continue on this track for the next 30 miles. Oh, good. You don't have to offer to move out of the way. You know, you're there first. You just keep going. It's outside controlled airspace. That said, look, around Shell Harbour, that whole area, Marimbula, you've got so much parachuting and so many twin-engine passenger carrying services, SAABs and Metros going in and out of there. It is nice if you offer to get out of their road. Like, sometimes they have to do an RNAV approach that might be opposite direction to where you're flying down the coast. Like, well, I know, and I sometimes will say, last time I did it, you can expect to get visual passing about 1,800 feet. I'm going to stay no closer than 1 mile over water. I'd almost gone, oh, you beauty, thanks, man. So they know they're going to pop out. There's no controller to tell them what the cloud base is, so you might just offer to them on the MBZ or CTAF frequency to let them know what you can see. Oh, I can see the clouds there, and yeah, mate.
Just as a follow-on on that,
yeah.
I guess that question with regard to being able to see a transponder, what do you see in terms of the EC devices?
Nothing. If it's not certified, nothing.
So it won't come up at all?
Don't think so.
Military surveillance?
No, I don't want to see something that's not being tested to demonstrate your exact position and altitude and code. It's either certified,
So,
in which case you can use it in controlled airspace, or it's not, you stay out.
The only people who will see an EC device is somebody who's got ADSB in and that's it?
Well, we might be able to see it, but we can't use it for anything. So you would, if you needed to have a transponder to enter a certain type of airspace, you would have to have that. But yeah, I'm not sure about the ECs. My feeling is that probably it'll come a point where it'll get too much clutter and we'll select a filter to turn them off. Maybe. I'm not sure about that. Again, I've just got a radar feed from Melbourne Airport, and I don't have that functionality to click and see what the ADSB targets are. I can only see 1200, but the guys in the radar room can see it. In fact, I can look on flight radar on the screen next to me and see it, and that's actually a thing that we do now. Yeah, it's quite helpful. Yeah, Ken?
The question before about interpret. You're approaching Albert Park and that's what we're told to stay outside controlled airspace. What's your best plan to stay close enough to get back into control?
That's a good question. So what Ken's asked is, I'm approaching, I'm ready to come in, and I've just been told to stay out. Sometimes I'll actually tell aircraft, so let's just say on your present heading, you're 2.5 minutes from the MCG. I know I've got an IFR chopper about to lift from the Royal Children's Hospital, but I can't see them, they're not yet on radar, I have to separate you. So I can't even give you a clearance inbound via the MCG yet. Because technically it's like, oh great, you just cleared a VFR aircraft, now what happens if your radar fails or whatever? You now have no separation assurance, even though they're not going to hit in a million years. What I don't want then is for you to help yourself to ginormous super orbit, track back down towards Mornington Peninsula and change frequency. It's like, I was never going to delay you, I just can't give you a clearance right now. So what we have to say, according to the book, is clearance not available, remain outside Class Charlie airspace. I will sometimes add, expect no delay. So it's like, well, you're telling me one thing and then telling me another. So I'm kind of, because my rules say, if you can't give a clearance immediately, you must say, clearance not available, remain outside Class Charlie airspace. So what's the pilot going to do? All right, no worries. I'll just do a left turn and start doing some kind of a hold, or I might just go back to Moorabbin, or I might just continue west around the bay. I don't know what you're going to do, but if you actually want to come into Essendon, I want you to be overhead the MCG in 90 seconds. So how do I do that? I might just tell you, suggest you track towards Station Pier, expect inbound clearance via amended Balti Bridge in 90 seconds. Clearance unavailable, remain outside Class Charlie airspace. Well, that's just how it is. So, yeah. In answer, if you don't get any other instructions, you're just told clearance not available, I'll just do one standard sort of turn, whatever you decide that might be. And as you're about to enter the second one, if you haven't been given an update, I think you'd be within reason, depending upon how much radio, clutter you can hear. If they don't sound like they're doing very much, request onwards. What's your plan, man? Hopefully you've got one. Yeah.
Cross country. Recommended radials are not on even altitudes. That's just recommended. How many people adhere to it? And do you recommend it if you're...
Yeah, it's Class G, so any time you're over 3,000 feet above obstacles, you should really be aiming for the levels. But you know what, if you've got a cloud base of 5,400 feet and you want to go east, are you going to fly at 3.5 or are you going to fly at 5.4? I'd fly at 5.4 if I'm going over hills and that sort of stuff,
What about vertical separation, H?
just keep the fin in the cloud, because that's VMC in Class G, isn't it? It's not VMC in Class C though. Class C is different. You need to be 1,000 feet and 1,500 metres laterally, so you've got to sort of know which class of airspace you're in and what the rules are. And VMC in Class D is different to Class C as well. It can get a bit confusing. But I think definitely outside controlled airspace, the more you can stick to the hemispherical cruising levels where literally no one else is looking out for you, the better, I reckon.
So you don't poodle around doing random orbits?
If you want to, you can. Yeah. I do. It depends. If you want to, if that's your operation, if you're fire, but we get like fire spotters or people doing surveys or people just, I don't know, checking their fence on their farm. I don't know what they're doing, but if you are in a surveillance environment, whether you're inside controlled airspace or not, the more predictable you are, the easier it is for us to determine whether you're a confliction and to give you traffic or not. But yeah, it's up to you what you want to do. But I don't know why you would not fly at a hemispherical cruising level wherever you had the chance to. Anything else? All right, we might wrap it up there then. Thank you very much for your attention, everyone, and hope.